when I started to look around actively, purposefully for signs of optimism, I was looking for people who were studying the science of happiness. It turns out there isn't much out there. We've made one or two probes on this stage. One of the most dour people ever on this stage was a professor who studied happiness. You know, so far, I really didn't come across anything that resonated and could possibly be a counterweight to this avalanche of bad news. Bertolt Brecht, do you remember what he said? The man who is laughing has not yet heard the bad news. You know, so I came across this extraordinary quote, and of course then went for the book and had this exceptional aha moment, and it's the quote that actually animates not only this particular 12th outing, but really, as I thought about it, it encapsulates the whole and entire purpose of a conference such as this. Okay, the rate of cultural and economic progress depends on the rate at which ideas are having sex. It's so ingenious, really, when you think about it. I explain a little in my foreword. It's about ideas bumping into ideas, ideas begetting ideas, and the more diversity you can cram into a place, the more different ideas you can have bumping into each other. You get what you get in sex, as opposed to cloning, which is unexpected results, and the kind of results that move human history forward. So I won't continue much longer, except to say I thought it was perfect, got in touch with the guy, told him that his was the inspiration that was going to guide our work in this particular meeting, and was crushed to learn that he couldn't be here today. But because of the importance of it, and because of the really way in which it kicks off the conference on a positive note, I thought you would indulge me and we would indulge Matt Ridley. We got a hold of him on Skype. He gave his talk as if he were here, and I urge you to pay close attention to the screen. This is Matt Ridley.
Hi, good morning. My name is Matt Ridley, and I'm here to make the argument that ideas have sex, and that is the secret of human prosperity and is the grand theme of human history. And what I mean by that is that every object, every technology we make is a combination of different ideas that occurred to different people in different places and at different times and came together, and that is what enables us to have this explosive growth of technology that results in greater prosperity. And in fact, it's the exchange of objects, the exchange of ideas, is playing the same role in our cultural evolution that sex itself plays in biological evolution. Because what it does is it enables you to draw upon the inventiveness of the whole species, just as sex enables you to draw upon genetic mutations in your whole species. And so I'm here to argue that the world is actually, because of this process, likely to be a better place in future than in the past. That in fact we face increasing prosperity for a reason, which is that ideas are continuing to have sex. There's a lot wrong with the world. There's a debt crisis in Greece, there's a war in Libya, there's a nuclear crisis in Japan, and a lot could go wrong in the future. But ask yourself also, what could go right? And I want to begin by just reminding you how much better off you are than your grandparents, at least on average. For example, the value of the goods and services we produce in the economy has shot up in the last 200 years. But that's partly because there are more of us. The population has also shot up. So let's correct for population, and let's throw the graph even further back. Let's go back 1 million years. Now, admittedly, the economic statistics get a little shaky for 1 million BC, but nonetheless, we can see that the rate of growth of world GDP per capita has been increasing. In other words, prosperity's been accelerating over this period. And look where it's headed. Look where we'll get to in the year 2100 if it goes on like this. We will have the average citizen of planet Earth, the average, that's including Africans and everybody, earning between $100,000 and $200,000 per year by 2100. That's 3 to 6 times as much as the average American earns today. That would be an incredible achievement if we could get there. Isn't it worth just trying to find out whether it is possible? And that's really my argument. It's not just that the rich have been getting richer, the poor have been getting less poor too. The number of people living on less than $1 a day has been going down. There are different ways of measuring it, but they all show that it's decreasing. And that's because people are being lifted out of poverty gradually, bit by bit, not fast enough, but it's happening. And of course, in the end, prosperity isn't about money. It's about time. The true metric is how you fill your time. What you do with your time, how long it takes you to fulfill your needs. If you had to get up in the morning and you had to go out and get your own food and clothing and shelter and all these different things, how long would it take you? It would take you all day, and you'd only get a pretty minimal standard of living. As it is, how long do you think it does take you to fulfill one of your needs? Take light, for example, electric light. How long does it take you to earn an hour of reading light? That is to say, an 18-watt compact fluorescent bulb burning for about an hour while you read my book tonight? Well, the answer is, if you're on the average wage, it takes you half a second or thereabouts. And back in 1950, it would have taken you 8 seconds. That's 7.5 seconds of economic growth that you have got that your grandparents didn't. 7.5 seconds in which you can acquire some other need, fulfill some other desire, or just leave the lights on. And back in 1880, it would have taken you 15 minutes on the average wage to earn that much light. And in 1800, it would have taken you 6 hours. In 1800, the average person on the average wage in America could not afford a candle. That's a measure of how much more prosperous we are, the amount of time it takes to fulfill our needs. Okay, so we're better off materially, but are we healthier, happier, cleverer, kinder, cleaner, freer, more peaceful, and more equal? And the answer is yes. We're healthier because, look, we're living longer. On average, we live about 30% longer than we did when I was born. Where life expectancy is increasing at the rate of about 5 hours a day. And nobody expected this. In fact, quite the opposite. It was thought that there was going to be a cancer epidemic starting in the 1970s, caused by all those chemicals we were putting into the environment that would shorten our life. Here's Paul Ehrlich saying US life expectancy will drop to 42 years by the end of the 20th century. We're happier. As we get richer, people do get happier, both within countries, between countries, and within individual lives. You do see a correlation between wealth and happiness. It's not a perfect correlation, it's not a linear correlation, and there are plenty of rich people who are unhappy, but then that makes the rest of us happy, so that's okay. We're cleverer. Nobody quite knows why, but IQ scores have been going up all around the world for several decades now. It's probably because kids are getting better nutrition, so they're getting more, they're fulfilling their developmental potential better, or they're getting exposed to more images or something like that. They're having richer lives generally. We're kinder. We're giving more to charity as a proportion of our income each year. And we're cleaner. Most cities, particularly in the West, have much cleaner air than they did 30 or 40 years ago, and most water is cleaner too. Not everywhere. There are places that are getting worse, but it's not nearly as bad as we thought it was going to be. By 1985, air pollution will have reduced the amount of sunlight reaching the Earth by half, said Life magazine in 1970. It didn't happen. The opposite happened. And we're freer. The number of people living in democracies is going up. The number of people living in autocracies is going down. This year we've seen 2 more countries go from the brown line to the green line, as it were. That is for Tunisia and Egypt. And we're more peaceful. Your chances of being a victim of homicide are hugely lower than they were in the Middle Ages. And you probably didn't know this, but the 2000s, the decade just ended, was the most peaceful decade in human history since 1945 in terms of the number of deaths in wars. It doesn't feel like that to us here in Britain because we were at war in that decade in Iraq and Afghanistan. But globally, fewer people died in that decade as a result of war than in any decade since the Second World War. We're more equal. Most people don't believe that, but actually it's true. Inequality has been falling rapidly, and it's fallen even faster in the last couple of years because of the recession. And the reason for that is because people in poor countries are getting rich faster than people in rich countries are getting rich. Indians and Chinese have been getting rich much faster than Americans and Europeans, for example. So that's bound to make the world more equal. Well, am I just like the guy who's falling past the second floor of the skyscraper and he shouts out, "So far, so good"? Or can it go on? Well, I think it can. And I think the reason for this is because actually when you look at the trends, they tend to be heading in the right direction. Take population, for example. We were very worried about the population explosion in the 1960s, and we were right to be. The population was growing at 2% a year. Well, it's now growing at 1% a year. And it's heading downwards all the time, the rate of growth. The number of people added to the world population has been decreasing now for 20 years in absolute terms, not just in relative terms. And we're heading for a population that won't be growing at all by about 2060, 2070 on current projections. That might be wrong, it might be higher, or it might be lower, but it looks like the population growth rate is petering out. If projections are right, in this century we will see population increase 1.5 times, whereas it quadrupled in the 20th century. Now, if we could cope with a quadrupling of the population in the 20th century, surely with our technology we can cope with a 1.5 times increase in the 21st. Because we trebled agricultural yields in the last 60 years without taking any extra land into production. We did it by mechanization and fertilizers and new pesticides and new varieties and things like that. And we were told by the pessimists at every step of the way that it couldn't be done. Farmers can no longer keep up with rising demand for food, and famine is inevitable, said Lester Brown in 1974. We're hearing the same kind of things this year because the food prices spiked up again. But what tends to happen is that when food prices go up, farmers plant more food, and we get higher yields. Now, we're faced with some worrying trends. Global warming is one of them. But how worrying is it really when you actually look at the numbers? Sea level's going up, sure. But it's been going up for most of the last century. And for the last 2 decades, it's gone up at the rate of about 3 millimeters a year. If anything, it seems to be decelerating, according to the latest satellite evidence. Now, 3 millimeters a year is not a big problem. It's about 1 foot per century. It may accelerate or it may not. Greenland at the moment is losing ice at the rate of 200 cubic kilometers a year. That sounds like a lot of ice. It would fill Lake Erie in 3 years, for example. But it isn't that much. It's 0.5% per century. That means it'll take 12,000 years at this rate to melt Greenland. So, yeah, sure, it could get worse, but at the moment there's nothing particularly terrifying about what's happening to the climate. And even if the climate does warm, it doesn't mean that human improvement can't keep up with changes. For example, take malaria. Malaria was everywhere in 1900, and by 2007 it had retreated from large parts of the world, from Asia and North America, and it was retreating in Africa. Everywhere blue on the bottom chart of this slide shows where malaria is getting better, not worse, over the 20th century. Now, that didn't happen because the climate got less friendly for mosquitoes. The climate was getting warmer during this period. It happened because of mosquito nets and draining swamps and using pesticides and living indoors and all these things that we do to cut our chances of catching malaria. Your probability of dying as a result of extreme weather event. We've heard a lot about tornadoes and storms and swamps and droughts in the last year. Your probability of dying as a result of extreme weather events is 98% lower globally in the 2000s compared with the 1920s. And that's not because the weather's got less dangerous in that time. It's because we've got better infrastructure and better transport and better communication and better medicine and all these other things that enable you to survive bad weather, for example. In the case of fossil fuels, people are worried that during this century we're going to run into a terrible problem when we run out of them, and therefore that our fossil-fueled society is going to come grinding to a halt. We're not going to run out of fossil fuels. The amount we've consumed is tiny compared with the amount that's still out there. Now, sure, a lot of it's not accessible. The blue stuff on the right-hand chart, for example, is hydrated methane on the sea floor. Nobody knows how to get hold of it yet. We just know it's there. So a lot of this is not going to be accessible. It's always a question of price, not quantity. Is there enough cheap energy in fossil fuels? And there we've just had a lump of very good news in the last couple of years with the discovery of how to exploit shale gas, which is a resource that is coming in at the cheap end of energy, and it looks like we've got about 250 years worth, a quarter of a millennium's worth of relatively affordable gas now in the world, which is a surprise we didn't know about a few years ago. So how is all this possible? What is it that enables human beings to experience prosperity, to get better off as there are more of them? It's an extraordinary idea. It doesn't happen to rabbits or deer or something. On my desk at home there are two objects. This one is an Ashwalian hand axe from 500,000 years ago, of the kind used by Homo erectus. And beside it sits a computer mouse, an object of exactly the same size and shape. And yet there's a huge difference. The hand axe was made by Homo erectus for himself. The computer mouse was made by other people for me. A team of hundreds of thousands of people got together and collaborated to make me a computer mouse. And none of them knew how to make a computer mouse even. The knowledge was shared among them. And that's the way human society works. We exchange and specialize, which means that we put together a collective brain that is much more intelligent than we are individually, and that achieves results and gives us technologies which reduce the time we take to fulfill our needs. Technologies in themselves don't improve our living standards. What improves our living standards is using technology to cut the time it takes to fulfill our needs, and therefore to fulfill more needs. And we have just taken a step that is surely likely to improve that process of inventing technologies that do that for us. The internet. As we wire up the world and we bring people into contact from Shanghai to San Francisco so they can share their ideas and put them together and recombine them, so we've accelerated the rate at which we come up with new recipes for improving the way people fulfill their needs and desires. And that means that the rate of innovation must be faster now than it was when there was less communication and less connection, when the collective brain, if you like, was more fragmented than it is today. And so the chances are we're going to see improved rates of human prosperity as a result of technical innovation in the 21st century. People often say to me, though, yeah, but you can be an optimist, but isn't pessimism necessary? If without worrying about the future, would we not give up and stop inventing ways to make the future better? I don't think so. Look at these 6 guys. What do they have in common? Archimedes and Al-Khwarizmi, Fibonacci and George Stephenson, Thomas Edison and Steve Jobs. Every single one of them lived in the richest place on earth in his day. And every single one of them was a member of the most ambitious and optimistic and hopeful society of his day. None of them lived in places where things were desperate and they desperately needed to invent things in order to improve the world. They were driven by ambition and optimism, not pessimism and concern. Yeah, but then people say, well, isn't optimism complacent? Again, I don't think so. I think what's complacent is thinking that today's technologies are good enough, and not realizing that today's technologies are terrible compared with what we could come up with in the future. And so, for example, when people say we mustn't have genetically modified foods because it might be worse than the pesticides we use today, I think they're wrong. And I think actually that is a form of complacency, to say, let us be scared of future technologies, let us be satisfied with the technologies we've got. I want to end with this quotation. We cannot absolutely prove that those are in error who say society has reached a turning point. We have seen our best days. But so said all who came before us, and with just as much apparent reason. On what principle is it that with nothing but improvement behind us, we are to expect nothing but deterioration before us? Well, that expresses my view, but it wasn't me who said that. It was Thomas Babington Macaulay, the historian, writing in 1830. Already then, he was fed up with people saying, the world cannot get better, this is as good as it can get. And yet the world had hardly started getting better in terms of human living standards. So in going from the individual intelligence of Homo erectus that could make a stone tool, to the collective intelligence of today where we can make a smartphone and share ideas on it, I think we've gone from a world which had very slow changes in the improvement of human lifestyle, to a world that can see rapid and continuing and almost infinite improvements in human living standards. It may not happen, things may go wrong, but it's certainly possible that we could face a very good future indeed. Thank you very much.
Matt, I don't know if you're looking in. We've begun this year to get a little more aggressive with actually diffusing this event out there into the world by means of the internet. And so we sent Matt some codes. In theory, he may in fact be looking in which case, Matt, I want to thank you. That was inspiring, and I think I have a new slogan for my escutcheon: ambition and optimism, I think. What a great combination.